Five Bloods is an American war drama directed by Spike Lee, a Spike Lee joint. With themes of war, friendship, loyalty, revenge, and forgiveness, it follows the story of five black U.S. Vietnam War veterans of the 1st Infantry Division, who they renamed themselves as the Bloods, who reunite back in Vietnam in later years to once again venture back into the land they once fought on, to recover the remains of their fallen friend and former soldier and squad leader Stormin' Norman, who was killed in battle, and also to recover the gold they found that had been intended as a payment to the local fighters by the US government, which they intentionally hid at the same location years ago. With footage of Muhammad Ali and his stance against being involved in the war, along with the various civil rights leaders of the time, we see into the backdrop of values, beliefs that were conflicting with the minds of the Bloods at the time this war was happening and changing America. Guided by a Vietnamese local Vin, this new journey brings up many of the issues that they dealt with in the past, from Otis, a former soldier who comes back to also see his former lover, Vietnamese woman Tiem, whom he now finds out had unknowingly at the time given birth to their baby girl years ago, who has now become a woman, to another former soldier, Paul, an outspoken man who's encountered his various obstacles in life, and whose son David unknowingly follows him to Vietnam as well, in order to hopefully get his share of the loot, which he believes belongs to him also. To Eddie, a former soldier turned businessman, who's found himself in financial difficulties as well. And to Melvin, another former soldier and family man, who altogether embark on an impactful, memorable journey which brings them into various confrontations, especially of the past. The Bloods have a deal with French businessman Darush, who is helping the former US servicemen smuggle the gold out of the country. The Bloods on their journey also encounter an organization called LAM, which is dedicated to actively dismantling and clearing landmines in the area. And this confrontation, along with the world they find themselves in, leads ultimately to more violence. In the beginning of the film, we see the Five Bloods out enjoying the nightlife in Vietnam, mixing with locals, even former Viet Cong war veterans. At one point, a young Vietnamese boy, seemingly disabled by what was also called the American War, comes to their table asking for money, to which all the Bloods except for Otis are trying to get him to leave them be, since they are trying to enjoy themselves. However, Otis gives the boy some money, and much to the disagreement of the other Bloods, who feel they don't necessarily have any responsibility to this boy and don't feel any blame or guilt for the circumstances this boy is in necessarily, even if they can relate to him at some point. This moment seems to bring up some sort of memory of the past, where they feel like they just found themselves in Vietnam. The kid comes back later with fireworks to bring to the veterans outside. Although it shocks them at first, it appears he is trying to show them some sort of gratitude and have some celebration also. In this story, we also get the feel that Vietnam, during the war and years after the war and to today, haven't just got a one-sided view, belief, communication, or depiction of America, but Vietnamese people have also got to see and deal with the various issues that come with being involved with America, including its varied history, which has often treated black people or people of color or women differently, unequally, if not violently, or without a voice or fair rights. Looking into the character of Paul, we see a man who carries around much of the torment, stress, paranoia, and anxiety of being at war, even in just his everyday life. On his encounter with a Vietnamese local who goes to try to sell him a chicken as the Bloods are on a cruise to their destination, he gets heated and begins to use racial slurs on the man who accuses him of killing his mother and father, much to Paul's disbelief. It's explained that Paul, along with the other veterans, although Paul's tone generally seems a bit harsher, hadn't felt like they were given the proper respect they deserved, whether it was here in Vietnam or arriving back home in the United States. Paul's battling various demons of the past, including his connection to former squad leader Stormin' Norman. Paul admits that he constantly has dreams where he's speaking to Norm, and his ghost is constantly haunting him. At the end of the story, when Paul is facing his imminent death after becoming lost and disorientated in a swamp, he sees the ghost of Norm, who tells him it isn't his fault and that he forgives him. When we come to realize that it was in fact the bullets of Paul's gun that killed Norm by accident when he was trying to shoot a Viet Cong female fighter who had entered the frame. Although the Bloods are a team, we get the sense that the paranoia often takes over Paul's mind at times as he goes around accusing his brothers of evil or misguided intentions. When Paul's son David arrives, we see into a story which shows how he, like many sons, are longing for his father's attention and acceptance. Similar to his father Paul, David hasn't been afraid of getting himself into difficult situations and being able to survive. There's a similar courage that's displayed in David as he also is able to help out the Bloods when it's time to survive also. As Paul arrives on the scene, he goes about getting not only a blessing from his father to being in this team, but also the 4 other Bloods too, saying he wants to have a fair share of the gold once they recover it. In his treatment and communication towards women, it appears as though David has a bit more compassion or respect for women than his father Paul, as Paul is trying to be caring to Hedy, a female member of Lamb leader, when they all encounter each other again along the track. Paul, on the other hand, doesn't trust her and wants to keep her tied up so she doesn't try anything sinister, although she asks him and the group for more leniency. With the example of David getting his blessings to be a part of the group, there's also an overall question on whether the blessings were truly given for this dynamic war in the first place. As relayed by the character in Ghost of Storm and Norman, the Blood Squad leader, whose life never seemed to reach its full potential, hiding the gold to find later was reflected as being something of reparations for them, after all the various ordeals their ancestors had to go through and still have basically nothing today, even though they, along with various other black servicemen, were put on the front lines fighting for America, as is shown with this example. That seeing they were still impacted by slavery to this day, they wouldn't necessarily feel any guilt in taking this money and giving it back out to the wider black community, especially when they were doing the work of the United States government, and with this large sense of responsibility they had been given also. This sense of pride the Bloods have for the work they had been doing comes to a head when they are confronted by the so-called Viet Cong at the end of the trail, who feel that the gold belongs to them and not the US. However, seeing the US servicemen feel it belongs to them and won't give it up without a fight, then a new battle ensues and there is much bloodshed. There is also more blood and gore as the French businessman Duroche tries to double-cross the Bloods in order to keep the gold for himself and his crew, though he is ultimately unsuccessful. It can be said, similar to what is believed is the basis for America's involvement in the Vietnam War, that the US government was going to supposedly hand Vietnam back over to the French, although it appears it has more to do with America's self-interests than France, as is seemingly portrayed with this dynamic, seeing the Americans and French, though seemingly in a deal together, find themselves at odds with each other in the end. Although there is much joy and excitement with the idea that the Bloods will gain millions of dollars from regaining this gold, the bloodshed that they find themselves in, whether it's Eddie who accidentally steps on a landmine and dies, or David who narrowly escapes the landmine with the guidance and trust in his dad Paul, to the bloody battle with the so-called Viet Cong and later French businessman and his crew, the gold suddenly doesn't seem to be worth what it once was. This is especially true seeing the people going to all this trouble to get this gold may not even be alive to enjoy whatever treasures, valuables, or forgiveness the gold and money would potentially buy them. However, throughout most of the story, the Bloods do what they can to make their lives better given the harsh realities they find themselves in, as is also expressed later at the Black Lives Matter rally, where everyone is meeting up to have their voices heard and to make a difference. With the character of Melvin, he once reflected how he wasn't too keen on giving his life up to save another man as a former soldier once did. However, he finds himself in the same position of being able to save one of his Bloods when a grenade is thrown their way, and in this instance he jumps on top of it as it explodes, killing him, but saving those around him, particularly Otis. His share of the money ends up going to his wife and family. In The Five Bloods, we see into a world where a group of black US Vietnam War veterans return to a place where the ghosts, violence, and tensions of the past are still very much alive and have yet to find much peace or closure. That similar to Blood, the teachings and values of our forefathers and ancestors are carried on, whether it's courage or some sort of unrelenting attitude to life that's passed on to the next generation. We also find that although these Bloods are seemingly different to the other people in the world or a similar situation, there's a bond and commonality that they share, whether for good or bad, money or remembrance, that they are able to be by each other's side at times when it's especially needed. I invite you to comment whether you agree or not, or if you have any different takes on this film or its various elements. Thanks for watching.